what you have to say. So, um, before I get into introductions and everything, I thought I'd start us with a very short meditation. Let me tell you what the book is called. Hold on. If I can pull it up here. It's by Stephen Charleston. It's called Spirit Wheel Meditations from an Indigenous Elder. So it's just a short meditation that really struck me. Um, it's called No Strangers. So there are no strangers in the house of the Spirit. There are no empty chairs. All who seek shelter are welcomed. All who are hungry are fed. No one is turned away. No one questioned. No one made to wait. Love is offered freely to any, to every, to all. Diversity abounds in this household, a tribe of many clans, every language spoken, every family at home. If we are not all here, none of us have arrived. So, welcome. Um, we are honored to have the Reverend Holly Hale Thompson join us today. I have known of her for maybe about a little over a year. Surprisingly, I did not know of her before this, but I believe that I met you in a coalition to dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery space that was about some Shinnecock Nation issues in the Southamptons. And Reverend Holly was one of the speakers in that space. And just to remind you of her bio, she is a blood member of the Shinnecock Nation of Eastern Long Island. She was the very first Indigenous woman to become minister of Word and Sacrament in the Presbyterian Church USA. And she graduated from the University of Dubuque Theological Seminary and was ordained by the Presbytery of Western Colorado. She's served among several congregations on national committees concerned with Native American justice, the doctrine of discovery, racial equity, with the Presbyterian Church and with the United Methodist Church in its ongoing act of repentance in relation to Indigenous people justice and the church. Um, my observation of Reverend Holly is that she is very dynamic advocate for Shinnecock peoples and for Indigenous peoples. And I am really grateful to have her join us in this space today. And maybe just starting off, Reverend Holly, I don't know if you want to just tell us a little bit about um, your your background and maybe some of the challenges that you've seen in your community, and just start us there. And I think you're muted. There we go.
There you go. My husband wishes he had a button like that. Thank you very much for having me in the space in this event. Um, it's hard to know where to start, except that today we count. Not that our history began in 1640, because it didn't. We have been in the place where the Great Spirit put us for 13,000 years. And I like to let that hang in the air a bit, because we're blessed to be among the few peoples of the earth who are still in the place where Creator put them. But the context that brings us together in terms of the Presbyterian Church have to do with 385 years, 2 months, and 28 days since June 12th, 1640, when the English came to our shores and were welcomed. What is happening now is entirely connected to that 1640 happening. We have not made as much progress as people might have hoped to make. And I think there's two answers to that too. If the settlers were waiting for us to disappear, then they are sadly mistaken. And if we get up in the morning and hop to the village to see if our colonist friends have gotten on a boat in the middle of the night and gone back, we too have been disappointed. And I say that in jest, because that is one of the things, especially in the climate of 2025, that I say to non-Shinnecock and non-Indigenous people, is that we have not said to you, and we are not saying to you now, go back where you came from. We are saying we desire to live in peace side by side. But of course, that can't be realized without justice. And so that is the quest of the calling of my life, is to seek that justice among the Shinnecock and our neighbors.
Thank you. Let me see if I can spotlight myself here. So another thing, why don't you help us to understand what life in Southampton's is like? The contrast between the extreme wealth and the poverty that exists there.
Well, I guess in very general terms, the last census recorded that our people live at 61% of our community on the reserve, on the territory, live at or below poverty level, 61%. Before COVID, it had been 50-50. But since COVID, we have a larger percentage of our people who are struggling financially. And that is a contrast to the Hamptons, Southampton in particular, but certainly the Hamptons, where I've heard it said, I'm not a scientist, I'm not an attorney, so please feel free to look up the things that I reference, because I do speak very generally, but I do encourage people to find out more about what I'm talking about. But in my lifetime, I have heard it said that Southampton, if you could make Southampton one place on the globe, you would find it the wealthiest place in the world. I wouldn't want to get in a fight over that, but I want to say it's certainly in the running. And that becomes important because people who are living at poverty level have to go to the same grocery store and buy the same prices that the richest people in the world, well, they don't go to the grocery store, they send somebody to the grocery store. But you see the idea of what I'm talking about. The standard of living for the wealthiest people in the world makes it a lifelong challenge for some of the poorest people in that community to even live. And the injury there is apparent. I think that we can see that poverty is violent against people. But I think the other part of that is that, but we're the indigenous people of that area. These people who are our neighbors, with whom we want to live in peace, are on our land that they stole from us. And Presbyterians led the way in 1640. The original deed, it's December of 1640, talks about, and signed by Abraham Pearson, the founding pastor of First Presbyterian Church, Southampton. And it talks about the 8 square miles now that is Southampton Village. And at the bottom of that document, which of course is written in English, it is not written in Shinnecock, you can see the crooked little X's that indicate the mark of the native person who was agreeing to this, witnessing this deed. And that crooked little X has always said to me, if anything shows that there is not a full understanding of what this lasting legal document means, somebody who doesn't even speak that language, their mark would represent that. And so that has not, of course, gone away. That was the beginning. And in particular, we've been raised with the idea of our Shinnecock Hills. Shinnecock territory at one time was all the way to Brookhaven, all the way to East Hampton. Look on any of your Long Island maps and you will see that that's an extensive area. What in my great-grandmother's generation and her mother's generation, what we begin to focus on are the 3,600 acres of the sacred Shinnecock Hills. And so that's a much reduced territory, but the theft of that is so blatant and so well documented that when we're talking about land back, we are talking about, in modern times, the 3,600 acres. My great-grandmother would say to her eldest grandchild, who was my mother, and I'm her eldest daughter, when we get our hills back, this will happen, or when we get our hills back, that would happen. And those words I have heard all my life, and they mean several things, but one thing that it means is that my great-grandmother, for some certainly spiritual reason, expected justice. And so we, her great-grandchildren, say, when we get our hills back, because we still expect justice, although we have not seen much evidence of that happening. The work that I do now with the Nehmuhk Land Trust, that is an Indigenous land trust of Shinnecock matriarchs, and we are trying acre by acre to, at this point, purchase our hills back, have them protected, have them preserved, have our neighbors stop desecrating our graves. To build these mansions in the Shinnecock Hills, many parts of our cemetery have unearthed ancestors. And until 2023, it wasn't even illegal in New York State to dispose of those human remains any way one wished. I'm holding up a document. Please look this up. New York State Unmarked Burial Site Protection Act, which our Shinnecock people were instrumental in bringing to the desk of the governor to be signed. And what it does is it talks about what someone is supposed to do when they come across human remains in their building project. And so many people say, oh, well, we never knew. Well, Shinnecock has been talking about protecting our ancestors' burials for many generations. But you see, we're not a political entity. We are not landholders in the way that relates to taxes and money or influence as our neighbors. And so we have not been able to have a place at the table when they're talking about what is the right way to deal with Shinnecock lands, the hills in particular. So that's slow progress. So anyway, this is the setting that we are in today. We are trying, in between the efforts to purchase and preserve land, other parts of the tribal nation. And I do like to say that, generally speaking, when we say Shinnecock Nation, we're talking about the political leadership of Shinnecock Nation. So if someone says, oh, Holly was there from Shinnecock Nation, yes, I am a blood member of the Shinnecock Nation. I, however, am not a politician in the government of the Shinnecock Nation. And we like to draw that distinction because I think 1950s John Wayne movies helped perpetuate the idea that all the Indians have one thing to say, and that little shaggy chief over there is the one who has to say it. And I have to say, there is nothing further than from the truth. We are matriarchal people. The women in the families, the clan mothers, that is how our society was arranged. And until 1792, when the Southampton folk were able to appoint male leadership for us, which is when the women lost our voice and vote. And tribal government since 1792, women could not run for office, could not vote, could not speak in a meeting. It wasn't until I was 34 years of age that I was allowed to speak and vote in my tribal government. I set that down as a marker because that was imposed in 1792, and it was not challenged by any entity that could have helped to change that. These are the things that, when you put them together, it shows how many layers of powerlessness that we have had to operate beneath. And so when we get a chance to talk about what needs to happen in terms of the Shinnecock community to finally walk a road toward justice, we're talking about all of these things that have happened And then we're talking about what are the ways that we can move forward together that will not perpetuate these things, but will address these inequities of the past. I'm going to quote one minister and then I'm going to be quiet because I want you guys to ask questions, because I just go on and on within these, thousands of years. But you certainly want to know specific things. But I will quote William Apis. William Apis was a Pequot minister, and he wrote quite a bit. He didn't write as much as Samson Occam. Samson Occam, of course, being the Mohegan Indian from Connecticut, who would come to Shinnecock, would come to Montauk, married a Montaukett woman, and was ordained in the East Hampton Presbyterian Church. And that was 1759. And he, of course, was the first male native ordained in our denomination. And then I'm these 300 years later as the first female. But William Apis, the Pequot minister, drew a distinction for the people with whom he spoke between guilt and responsibility. And the idea of those of us who are living today, it is true, none of us have actually created those things that happened in the past, for which we say there is a lot of guilt there. But we are the ones today who have a responsibility to do something about righting those wrongs.
So I'm gonna open things up to our friends in a second, but I want to maybe piggyback on what you just said, and I know you could talk to for days about the topic that I'm going to bring up, but I think that we do face a lot of these challenges where maybe churches are at different levels of addressing and acknowledging historical harms. And I believe that it has been your experience um, that a Presbyterian church in your area continues to, um, I guess, celebrate their Founders Day and celebrate their land theft or not acknowledge their real history, I guess, as I want to say. So I think that's when you're talking about grappling with guilt and with the line between guilt and repair and relationship. And kind of maybe if you can talk to us a little bit about what that dynamic has been of seeing Founders Day banners all over the place every summer. Um,
All right. I can do that. Do you folks remember the deed that I described about 5 minutes ago with Reverend Abraham Pearson's description of the land that would be Southampton Village, and the little squiggly marks and the loopy signatures of the English and the Shinnecock Indians? Well, that uh, document is blown up to the size of a poster and is on the wall in the founders room of First Presbyterian Church, Southampton. And it's in place of pride. And I can understand people wanting to acknowledge whence they have come and their history in the larger scheme of history. But the the fact that our neighbors are completely oblivious to what their society means for life in my society. Southold, which is on the North Fork, also claims a 1640 founder's date. But there's a matter of a few months and a few filing of certain papers that back in 2015, when there was the 375th anniversary, Southampton was having their whole year of celebration, and then Southold was having their whole year of celebration. And I was telling one of my Southern Ute friends, she's in the United Methodist Church. I said, they're spending the whole year fighting about who's here first, and we're laughing. And then she just got really tickled. And I said, well, what's so funny? She said, they can't argue about who got here first. They can only argue about who got here second. And I used my Southern Ute sister's words to those on Founders Day on the 375th anniversary, and just inviting people to pause and realize that whatever is your life in this place, whatever it is, it relates to the Shinnecock people. You're in Shinnecock Hills. You're in Shinnecock Bay. You're next to the Shinnecock Territory, the Shinnecock Canal. Whatever it is relates to the Shinnecock people. So yeah, and they're fighting now. I will say that one of those things is getting ready to backfire, though, because we have in Long Island Presbyterian Reverend Kate Jones Cologne, who is the general presbyter now. And in her wisdom, she reached out to me several years ago, and we have created a conversation and a relationship. And as these lawsuits, these are new lawsuits coming against our people, she and I are in conversation, and she has been in a position to help stand with, if not advocate for, the Shinnecock people. But in one of her reaching out to the other churches in the presbytery, she asked who would like to be in conversation with Holly, because she talks about Doctrine of Discovery and the responsibility of the Presbyterian Church and the things that we accepted with the General Assembly in 2018 and all that stuff. And there was a woman, there were two churches that said yes. One was a church west of us, a Korean church, and the other was a Southold church, an elder from the Southold church. And when I heard that, my antenna went right up. I said, oh, the Southold Church. I would love to have a conversation with people from the Southold Church, because they're already boxing with the Southampton people. And maybe they would have the capacity to hear a little bit more. And we have established a relationship and a conversation. We have met 4 or 5 times in very meaningful settings, and I will go to their church, although I won't be preaching that Sunday morning. That's another point. I don't want to get into that, but Sunday afternoon, I will be meeting with people from that community who want to learn more and be in conversation with Shinnecocks about Shinnecock.
And I've heard you mention some court cases. I believe that I saw there have been some challenges over land recently, but Shinnecock Nation has won those challenges, I believe.
Well, no, we haven't won anything yet.
Okay.
We are, and this is the distinction between my work with the land trust, trying to uh, have land returned to our stewardship, either by purchasing it or by having um, the preservation department purchase it to protect it, because our idea is to protect it. That is in contrast to the things such as economic development that our nation, and that's the political nation, is trying to establish economics for our people. And these current lawsuits, two from New York State, two from the town of Southampton. The ones from New York State are challenging the utilization of our land. Shinnecock people using Shinnecock land. So this isn't a boundary issue of their encroachment, which is regular. You can set your clock by the encroachment. There's a person on the town council right now who lost a lawsuit against us because he tried to encroach on our land, and we took him to court and he lost. And now he is in the town council government suing Shinnecock, not for land that he's trying to steal, but land that they are trying to control that is already in our hands. It is reservation land, and they haven't any jurisdiction over it, not the village, not the town, not the state. And so that these are the lawsuits that are against us now for us using our own land. And so that is, I mean, it's already sketchy to defend. um, I have a Choctaw native brother who's a minister in the denomination, and he's married to a Dakota Presbyterian woman who is a minister in the Presbyterian church. I knew them both as children. They're both adults now. But he said, when we're talking about Native issues in the Presbyterian church, he said, well, the Presbyterian of South Dakota said, we'll talk about anything with you, but not the land. We stole it fair and square. And I just shake my head, because that is the attitude, and people dig in their heels. And we're supposed to be a church, and you're going to stand and say, we stole something, and we don't even want to talk about it. You know, what's the point of forgiveness and confession and sin and repentance if none of it means anything, if the big guy with the loaded gun is going to be in charge? And so these are things you can call them, what do they call them in seminary? There's a certain tension here. Yeah, there's a certain tension here. And it all comes down to, when life is healthy and peaceful in my household, it's much more likely that my neighbors can have a healthy and peaceful household. That's what loving thy neighbor is all about. So these lawsuits that are going on now are based on, now here's some other thing for note taking. 2005, the Doctrine of Discovery was cited and used to support lawsuit against the Oneida people of New York State. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg cited the Doctrine of Discovery as to why the Oneida people do not have the right to own their land. And then New York State cited that same 2005 atrocity, and then Southampton town cited that same atrocity as to why we cannot utilize our own land in the way that we choose to for self-development. So that's what's going on now.
Can you speak a little bit to some of the environmental challenges that Shinnecock peoples are faced with right now?
I'm going to start with the positive. The positive is that the Shinnecock kelp farmers, please look them up. They're getting very well known. They are growing sugar kelp in the Shinnecock Bay because the acidification and the nitrates in the water are poison and are deadly. And there had already been a fair amount of pollution in our Shinnecock Bay, you can imagine. But a lot of that, beyond recreation, has to do with the fact that Southampton, and when I'm being sarcastic, I say Southampton, they have not, in their wisdom, created public sewage and water treatment. So that means poop happens. And we are south. We are the water goes through everything in their golf courses, as green can be. I know chemicals do that. I don't know what chemicals do it, but I know that it isn't just because the famous and rich people are playing golf on those graves that it's so picturesque. And the US Open will be there again next year. The 1970s, the potato farmers poisoned our groundwater on Shinnecock with Nehmuhk. Nehmuhk, a deadly cancer-causing chemical. And the people in our community have been dying of all manner of rare cancers since that time. And after COVID-19 hit New York, hordes of people came to escape New York City and moved to the Hamptons and started building, and the pollution got so bad the Peconic Bay was closed. But all of that terrible, dangerous overdevelopment is making the land polluted and it's making the water polluted. And so there is a group of 5 Shinnecock women who are the kelp farmers, and they are growing sugar kelp. I have a lawnmower coming, pardon me.
Eileen,
Yes. Hi, Mary.
while she's gone, I know living in Indian Territory in North Dakota and South Dakota, one of the things you learn very quickly is that people outside of Indian country know nothing about Indians.
Mhm.
And the kind of ignorance that the Presbyterian Church in Southampton is showing would be shared by most of the Presbyterian churches in our denomination because they just don't know anything about Native peoples. And I don't know how much happens at General Assembly on this issue, but I think that's certainly a place where there should be a continual focus of education about Indian issues at that level because of the huge number of people who just don't know or get it.
I don't know if you caught what Mary said, Holly, but she was just speaking to the widespread ignorance um, around Indigenous peoples, Indigenous issues in the Presbyterian Church.
please excuse me. My husband fixes lawnmowers, and he was taking it for a test drive right by my shed office here. So, yes, again on the positive. So we ended with the kelp farmers doing something positive. It was the 1970s that the Presbyterian Church did a study because we were experiencing what they called then a crisis in leadership among the Native peoples. And this is what led to my going to seminary in the 1980s. But in the 1970s, at one point when they wanted to see how many Native pastors were, there were just over 100 churches at that point. There are fewer than 100 Native churches in our denomination now. But at that point, there were still just over 100 Native churches. But of the few ordained leadership ministers that they had who were Native people, the average age of those people in the 1970s was 1955, and they thought they better address this leadership crisis. And so a lot of us found our way to the seminary. And in Dubuque Seminary, we had 12 students in 1981, which meant 12 families had come from North Dakota, from Idaho, from Washington State, from Oregon, from Arizona, from New Mexico, from Oklahoma, and then I came from New York. And there in Dubuque, they had a Native American program at the seminary, trying to address the leadership crisis. Part of what happened was Dakota Presbytery had students who were already pastors at their churches, but then came to Dubuque for formal training because Presbyterians love to beat us up with Hebrew and Greek. And so these people who are fluent in two languages had to not use the two languages that helps in their communities, but they had to go to Dubuque and learn Hebrew and Greek. Okay, fine, whatever. So many of these people from these far-flung places, far-flung from Dubuque, were able to go back to their home communities and give the kind of prepared, educated leadership for our communities that we needed. So that was the main focus. Now, what I discovered, if Columbus can discover something, then I can discover something important too. Because I did not go back to Shinnecock to be the pastor. I was student pastor there, yes. But one of the young men from our community was educated in Princeton, and he had gone to Arizona to work for the Synod of the Sun, where he was ordained. And then he came back to Shinnecock and was hired. He's been there for more than 35 years. The little political part of that is that Long Island Presbytery refused to ordain him. When I throw a little gem out like that, I am not going to defend it, but I'm also not going to unpack it because I can only assume what some of those reasons are as to why the Presbytery of Care helped put a young man through Princeton and then wouldn't ordain him. I don't know. Did it have all to do with the fact that he was Shinnecock? It had a lot to do with the fact that he was a Shinnecock. In the 1950s, one of my mother's elder cousins tried to help a young Shinnecock man go to seminary. And he was told by the presbytery, we don't want a Shinnecock minister. We're not ready for a Shinnecock minister. You, young man, need to do something else with your life. The last Shinnecock ministers, of course, the most famous one is priest Paul Cuffey, and he died in 1812. So when I went to Dubuque, I was under care of another presbytery, to which I head right, because I wasn't going to go to Long Island Presbytery and ask them to stand in the way of my calling. And went to Dubuque and passed all the ords and did all of those things. But I could not as the pattern had been, go back to your own community and preach for your people. I ended up going to Southwest Colorado, working at the Toyoak Church, which was about 100 years old when I was there in the 1980s. And so it was international with Ute Mountain Ute people and a Shinnecock. That was stated supply. And when I was finished there, I was there 3 years. I started exploring different churches in the denomination who I wanted to serve. The denomination had told us that they want to hear from Native people. Well, since my ordination in 1986, and what are we in 2025? So I'm on 39 years ordained. I'm here to tell you that the Presbyterian Church has not wanted to hear from Native leadership. I used to keep my rejection letters just as part of a therapy. You know, one doesn't want one's ego growing too far, so I would keep my rejection letters. I had stacks of Dear John letters and any manner of reasons why, well, we don't have any Indians in our community, so we don't need to hear from you. They would make it broader. Well, we don't have any people of color in our church, so we don't need to hear about racism. Well, why don't you go to Arizona? There are some Indians in Arizona. So my whole, not the whole 40 years, because I did work for the 3 years as stated supply. I've heard the church reject the concept of having natives in leadership in their pulpits on Sunday morning. So I developed what I call hit and run. And my hit and run is a pastor who has to worry about keeping her job, and it's usually a woman, but she knows that her community, her congregation could benefit by some of the things that I could share. And so I developed my hit and run. And I can come and be a leadership in this position. You don't look like a minister. That's right. No church will hire me because I don't look like a minister. And worse, as one executive presbyter told me, we're afraid of what you might say. I'm preaching gospel good news. I'm reading the same scriptures that you're reading. The difference is every time I read those scriptures, I'm a Shinnecock Indian. And so what I am preaching about is good news from a Shinnecock perspective. Did Great Spirit make a mistake by not making everybody Scotch Presbyterian? I say no. I say there are many ways to receive and walk in this message. But the church has made it very clear. And so after 25 years of ordination and asking for work hither and yon, I asked for honorable retirement. I had just turned 50. And I said to the presbytery, well, you don't seem to ever have any work for me. So what if I ask for honorable retirement? Here's your hat. What's your hurry? I say, you do know that at 50, I cannot earn any retirement income. But I also learned by not having a salary for 40 years means that you don't have a pension. And so even to this day, I work at least twice a week as a volunteer to something having to do with the Presbyterian Church and maybe another spiritual organization. Never a salary, and now never a pension. So these are the things. And yes, the denomination is very needy. They need to hear from leadership of color. But I also tell the denomination, there's not a line of Shinnecock standing behind me waiting to talk to you.
Reverend Holly, thank you for speaking some difficult truths, important truths. We just have a few minutes left, so I want to see if anybody else would like to ask Reverend Holly question.
Hi, Reverend Holly. I'm Jed Cobol. I'm a colleague of Eileen and Valerie's. I actually live in Peru, but I work in relationship with Valerie and Eileen. I don't really have a question more. I just want to celebrate you, celebrate what you've shared with us today, and and recognize that, we in this space here and with some others have been looking at, that 2018 decision of the General Assembly, and we want to celebrate that, to denounce the doctrine of discovery, but recognizing that there hasn't really been uh, any follow-up to that. Nothing has been put in, maybe on the margins. There's been a handful of congregations who are doing some initiatives, but really, as a body, as the Presbyterian Church USA, it's one thing to say, yeah, that was bad, but now what are we going to do about it? And so how do we, in practical, in concrete ways, it can't just be this theological conversation. It's got to be something meaningful, like how do we put land back at the center, of what the church is today, our quote unquote mission, and have voices like yours at the heart of that saying, this is what land back looks like. This is what needs to happen. Presbyterian churches need to be fully on board with land back, and, giving land back. And then what does that mean? What does our relationship to the land then look like? And of course, more, what does our relationship with our indigenous sisters and brothers, siblings look like? But I'm anxious for, a bigger movement to take place. We see evidence of it happening. A church in California has given, or a presbytery there gave an acre of land back, and in Alaska, a little bit of land back here and there. That's great. But it needs to be something bigger, more, collective, informing one another, and voices like yours at the center of that, helping us figure out how do we do this. So I just want to thank you for being here and taking the time to talk with us today. It moves me, and I'm very, very, very happy and empowered by you. So thank you.
Thank you, Jed. May I say a couple of things? One, there is a new group we met for the first time on Zoom June 16th, and it's Land Back Interfaith. So that is a group. And then our former co-moderator, Ilona Street Stewart, was on there with me. There were World Council of Churches people. So there will be more coming from that group by and by. But what we can do, and I say to any Presbyterian who will listen, go find the United Methodists who have since 2012 made a commitment to the ongoing act of repentance. And they, in their courage, put it in their discipline. So they can't get around it. Presbyterians can get around anything, but the Methodists put this act of repentance, the ongoing act of repentance, in their discipline. And so wherever you are, there is a Methodist entity who is keeping that. So I encourage people, and it is hard, but we don't have to reinvent a wheel. We can see a denomination who has made this framework and also standing with them because their churches aren't filling up the same way that Presbyterian churches aren't filling up. Oh, what if these two denominations got together on something that talks about the ongoing relationship between the churches and their native neighbors and what has happened and what could happen, and in some places what is happening. So I say that to you in all seriousness, and maybe enough Presbyterians will be inspired to say, hey, maybe this is something that we can do. Or there are some presbyteries that talk about a percentage of land sales when a church property is sold, a percentage. Or at Stony Point, they actually repatriated the church and the church building to the Ramapo people on whose land they are. So there are little ways of doing it, but I celebrate those because when that happens, I refuse to accept, well, it can't ever happen. It has happened and it can happen again.
Okay, so unless anybody else has a burning question, I see Valerie unmuting, maybe.
No, I just
Oh,
wanted
you
to say, I really just wanted to say thank you as well, Reverend Holly. Your voice carries so much. I'm Valerie. I work a lot with Eileen and Jed and do the international work for the Presbyterian Hunger Program. And the whole time when you were speaking, what I kept thinking also just was, the way you tell that story, but at the same time, we hear the same stories from people around the world, the history of discovery.
We do.
And I myself, growing up in Cameroon, I feel like it's not just the church here that doesn't know. Even internationally, there has been an erasure of how we tell if I can call it like that, the Indian story. And I'm just thinking that it would be good when we gather our international partners discussing land issues, that they will benefit as well, really hearing about like what we call the original sin that happened in this country years back. It's not just an American story, but I grew up watching all these Western movies. And again, the way it was painted, that's what out of the borders of the United States, that's what people see. I just feel like there's so much that needs to happen, but I really just wanted to say thank you for taking the time and for being with us and the way you just really explained everything. Really appreciate that.
Ellie,
you so much.
Oh, sorry. Ellie, were you wanting to say something? You came off mute too.
No, just thank you. I remember
Okay.
when Holly was ordained.
You remember that back in history? Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
I'm going to pop in the chat and I'll follow it up with a email as well. But this is I'm putting a YouTube link for Reverend Holly's presentation on Shinnecock 101 that I found from the spring. And I'll send that around to folks by email because, I mean, Reverend Holly has a rich history to share that, of course, cannot be shared in an hour. And there are a lot of really great things that you can learn from watching that YouTube. So, anyway, and if you have any other resources to share that you'd like for me to share around with our larger listserv, you can send those to me, Reverend Holly, and I'll share those. But we are very grateful to you. We appreciate you being here in this space with us. So thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you very much. Yes.
And I thank and encourage all of you. We're going to walk this justice road together. We've made that commitment. And that's what we're here to do. So thank you for all of your work in that regard.
Thank you so much. Everybody have a great rest of your day.
Thank
Take
you
care.
all. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.